When I came back to Boulder after law school in Chicago, the town had changed. It was pretty much still a college town, but there were many tourists, and the tourists were of a particular type. They were referred to as hippies. And they kind of excited the locals, I guess you would say, into things they probably wouldn't ordinarily have done. But the police in particular went after the so-called hippies, and they were always arresting them for this, that, or the other. And some of the things the sheriff's office would do to them is they would turn a fire hose on them after they arrest them in the jail. And that was supposedly to clean them off because they were dirty hippies and things like that. They were always trying to have excuses to cut their hair. It was sort of a subtle war, and some of the tactics were kind of familiar to me, having grown up with the civil rights movement in the South and also around Chicago. One of the main things that drove the hippie movement back then was rebellion against parents, and also rebellion against the draft. A lot of them just didn't feel or believe that the draft was justified and it wasn't worth their time, effort, etc. to go to Vietnam. When I was in law school, I did a few teach-ins where I went around in the Midwest teaching various student factions about the draft and about the law and about Vietnam and Southeast Asia, etc. About the same time I was doing that, my brother was flying B-52s over North Vietnam, bombing the shit out of them. So we had some major philosophical differences, I'd say. Anyway, I was sitting as a judge in Lyons one night, and a bunch of cowboys from there came in with sheep shears, the old hand type that you squeezed, did like that. So they came in with sheep shears. They were pretty much shit-faced and disrupting the court. And what they were going to do is kidnap a few hippies and cut their hair. So I told them they couldn't do it. I told them to leave. And I said that about 3 or 4 times. Finally, I told them I would call the sheriff's office in Boulder and have them arrested if they didn't leave. Well, one of them said, go ahead, so I about had to. The sheriff came up, and apparently, before the sheriff got there, the guy changed his mind and left. Or at least he wasn't there when the sheriff arrived. There were other instances that were kind of comical and somewhat serious, and a lot of the association of hippies was association with marijuana. So they assumed anybody with long hair probably was holding marijuana, and they used the length of the hair as probable cause to stop somebody and search them. This seemed awfully... It was really interesting because a lot of my clients at that time with long hair and beards would rent wigs when they got on leave from the service, and they were actually in the service at the time they would come to Boulder. And I have to admit that a lot of them did come to Boulder in order to get drugs and various other items. So they used to have these roundups in Boulder where they go out and round up the hippies and put them in the showers or turn a fire hose on them in order to clean them up. Sometimes they would also say they were delousing them. They always had good excuses, but it was, I thought, the borderline cruel. The district attorney we had took the hard position on drug cases that you either plead guilty to the drug case or go to trial. Now, you've got to remember, a lot of these were young people just starting their lives, their adult lives. A lot of them were 18. They were students 18 to 21. The consequence of a drug conviction on their records would have been disastrous, to say the least. And I thought, why not give them a few chances and not cloud their record with felony convictions? And I felt very strongly about that. And when election came up, I decided to run for district attorney. Having studied the situation, I decided the best position I could be in to instigate change or institute change would be the district attorney's office. So there are all kinds of humorous instances back then that I can talk about and plan to talk about in the future. But one is fairly striking. The students decided to barricade the main road into Boulder, which was the toll road or freeway now, and not allow cars in. That disturbed the police, I guess. So they got this big, massive policeman from Boulder County, Jefferson County, Adams County, thousands of them. They're police and sheriff's officers. And my belief, talking to some people that I met later, this was part of an Operation Garden Plot to test the communications between agencies. And anyway, the marchers were marching, the Garden Plot people were plotting, and soon they would clash. Well, interestingly enough, God damn this thing. I'm sorry for the machine acting up. So it was in the spring. I remember one case I had resulting from that incident where 3 faculty members at the University of Colorado were arrested and prosecuted for attacking police batons with their teeth. The prosecution didn't get very far on that, by the way. So anyway, I'm watching from the sidelines, watching the police operate, watching them herd the hippies and demonstrators and things like this. They were testing their training, I could see. When all of a sudden they started popping tear gas. Apparently the protesters weren't dispersing quickly enough. So clouds of tear gas came, and then all of a sudden some raiders from the Jefferson County Sheriff's office came, and they were wailing into the crowd with their nightsticks and things such as this. Well, 3 of the cops came toward Joe Walsh and I, and it was kind of humorous actually, because one of the Boulder County Sheriff's Office tackled the leading Jefferson County Sheriff's officer and said, "Don't bother him, he's running for district attorney here," which could have probably helped my election quite a bit had the police gone ahead and tackled me. But that was a funny incident. The only person they really prosecuted from that event was a young man, curiously enough, that was attending school at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and he was a spectator such as me. But since he was in the crowd and the right age, they did arrest him. It was kind of a funny case. I had the district attorney really embarrassed, and he wanted the case dismissed. So this is what it was sort of like in the 60s, in the so-called good old days, with the hippies and the yuppie revolution and things such as this. There are a lot of SDS members in town, and many of them were clients of mine. There are also other factions that were sort of on the fringe, including both left wing and right wing. Now, you heard me mention Gillia Tannenbaum and Professor Rhea earlier. They were two of the people sent here from Chicago to spy on everybody, and they did a pretty good job of it, but they screwed things up. David Weiss, a reporter for the Washington Post, wrote 3 books on the events of that era. One chapter in one book, Politics of Lies, I think it was, talked about the Tannenbaum-Rhea case, where Rhea disappeared. He was a professor at the University of Colorado, also happened to have been first cousin of Brzezinski, who served under Carter, I believe it was, and Henry Kissinger's first graduate student. His grandfather had also been first and only elected head of state of Czechoslovakia. Anyway, he disappeared, and I was representing him at the time. He didn't mention to me he was going to do that, or anyone else, but he just up and fled. Unfortunately, another client of mine that was referred by the lawyer that did the Merriweather case came into my presence, and her name was Mrs. Tannenbaum. And she had 2 children. I think they were like 4 and 7 or something such as that. Anyway, she became a real pain trying to establish herself in public relations and various things in the Boulder area. Well, all of a sudden, people around her started dying, and Rhea disappeared, and they indicted her for causing the disappearance, because he had, or she had, taken one of Rhea's possessions and sold it. So the logic was that if she had his possessions, then she was probably culpable of his kidnapping. And it wasn't really established that it was a kidnapping. In fact, I've got an Army intelligence report saying he was alive and well and living in Bratislava. In any event, that was one of the big cases back there. It was one part of the whole mess of the anti-war movement. The government was recruiting students in various protest groups to act as informants and keep an eye on what was going on. They infiltrated many groups. They infiltrated the Committee of 1,000. They infiltrated various ethnic groups like the Black Panthers, Indian groups like the American Indian Movement and the Chicano Movement, trying to provoke them into violence so they could go after them and prove their public relations propaganda that the left wing was a threat to the country. Where I'd spent already 7 years maybe, studying the right wing through the Birch Society and the Welches and the Schicks, people like that. I did an election study in Boulder about a fluoridation referendum, and I suspected Seventh-day Adventists, because fluoridation was against their religion, to be the source of the problem. They weren't. They kept neutral in the thing. The instigators were the John Birch Society, and they were pretty well organized in this area. In fact, while I was in school here, there was a big flap at NATO where they had the NATO general removed for propagandizing the troops over there. This was, pretty much a serious thing back in those days. His name was Major General Walker, and he ended up at CSU in Fort Collins, really close to Boulder. In future, videos, I'm going to go into the community of Boulder, the infiltration by various intelligence agencies, and why and how they operated back then. But when they were protesting Vietnam and closing down the road, I had no clue how Boulder fit into the whole national defense schema. In fact, the last few years have been shocking even to me. So, the roundup of the hippies didn't do anything. It didn't stop them. They still came to Boulder. Although we did have one case where a Boulder sheriff deputy murdered one up in Nederland, Colorado, because he claimed not to have liked hippies. And there was a lot of violent beatings by the cowboy faction in Boulder. But other than that, it was an amusing time. It was a serious time. And politically, it was very much active and actually sort of fun participating in all these. And I hope you subscribe to my video, because I need some subscribers in order to continue. Thank you very much.